Before we get started, I want to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Freedom 2.0. This is Freedom Water. This water ain't woke. Honestly, with Breakaway USA, we really try to focus on helping to build the parallel economy, a parallel society. So who you invest your money in matters. Which companies and brands you align with matters. It matters what their messaging is. It matters what values and principles they represent. This is war, and we are damn proud to be working with Freedom Water. They have some excellent water, not to mention some really dope apparel and products and things that you can get to support a company that is actively participating in the culture war. So thank you to Freedom 2.0 for being our sponsor. Let's get to the episode. In this episode of the Liberty North Show, we sat down with two members of the Lakeshore Sovereign Assembly. They have been waging their own form of warfare, basically testing the court system and the legal system to indeed show everyone that it is corrupt to the core. They have taken a really thorough and interesting approach at this, and they have gone deep into the realm of becoming a natural, free citizen outside of the particular matrix that enslaves us all. They have some really deep insights, and the battle they've been in has been a matter of integrity and persistence. It has not been easy or amazing or joyful. It has not been them entering some sort of freedom utopia. It has been quite the opposite, a deep struggle, a matter of coming face to face with corrupt entities in the legal and court system. They have a lot to offer. This is our second time sitting down with Dan. He brought along one of his students, and they really got deep into their recent court case, being faced with a series of charges that are nonsense, but also their process of flipping things around and revealing the criminality of the very judge that they were faced with. Check out the episode. It's great stuff. They offer some really powerful resources. We hope you enjoy this episode of the Liberty North Show.
Trudeau regime.
The New World Order agenda.
Canadian insight.
Without free thought, there's no free will. We can't even say that this is Democrats or Republicans.
That is not a left-wing, right-wing issue.
Trudeau, they couldn't make fool.
Communist warfare, communist warfare, communist warfare.
Canada's reputation. Fifth generation warfare.
The line between citizen and soldier is gone.
Hello, welcome to the Liberty North Show. Today we have some special guests. We have Dan Oke from the Lakeshore Sovereign Assembly and from True North Guardians Alliance. I got that right?
Correct, yes.
True North Guardians Alliance. And Akwasi, who is also part of the Lakeshore Sovereign Assembly and the True North Guardians Alliance. And they have some updates for us on their most recent court case. We had the pleasure of speaking to Dan about 2 weeks ago now, and they've had a court case since then, their day in court, and they're going to update us on that. I'd like to start, Akwasi, if you can just introduce yourself a little bit so people have an idea of who you are and how you've gotten to join Dan in this endeavor to question this corruption.
Yeah, I'll use that last thing, question this corruption, as a segue. I met Sensei in 2021, like I said, just at a health food store. I met his teacher, which, like he said, is his sensei. And from there, he kind of just started going into a lot of what's going on with the corruption, with how we can stand up on our rights, and just connecting the whole thing of spirituality and acting in your truth. It's something I've always been a part of in my own individual life. And just universally, it just aligned that way. We're able to meet up.
And so at the beginning of COVID, you guys started, not to recap, maybe you can recap us a little bit, Dan, about the beginning of COVID. You guys were already working on something similar before that, or was it really the beginning of COVID that was the catalyst for all this?
No, so it really was like 2020, right? The shutdown of everything. For myself, I've been, going through my own experiences and vision quests and everything along those lines, through not just through my teacher, but my own personal experiences. So by the time that like January 2020 rolled around, we already knew, okay, there's going to be a virus, a virus has been released and manufactured. The Hansa virus was being talked about, we knew about all those. And we knew that a vaccine rollout was imminent, a mandate was imminent, and a lockdown was imminent. We knew all that stuff. It was just a matter of when. And then when March 2020 came along, and I remember, saying goodbye to my students at that time, I was in my mind, I was like, okay, like the war's on, like here it is. And then it wasn't until about August of 2020 that local wasn't enough for me, right? Like I knew that there had to be a bigger impact and a better way to make change and to take action. So that's where, it became one of the national leaders of Hugs Over Masks, and then eventually it was Stanford E, and we went through that one last time. After we'd done a couple of the citizens' arrests somewhere in 2020, that was when I was driving home, and I don't know if Simon remembers, goodness me, but it's an organic food store in Burlington, and we were just driving by there, and I saw my sensei with a group of people in the parking lot. I thought something was going down, and it was like, okay, because we'd had to take a couple of other local actions but to deal with grocery stores that weren't letting people shop and, like follow the bylaw and everything like that. Turns out that my sensei had met Akwasi and a couple of other people, and they were having like a powwow in the parking lot. And Akwasi looked like a very happy deer in the headlights, because he was just getting truth bombs dropped on him, like spiritual truth bombs, like COVID truth, but like just bombs after bombs, like light bombs after bombs. And then my sensei smiled and goes, "See, that's one of my students right there." And as I'm coming up, so it was that was how we met and aligned on that one. And then
the organic process,
a very universally synchronistic process.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say that one.
And so, Akwasi, you were already into martial arts before this, or this is what got you into martial arts?
Yeah, I had tried different arts like jiu-jitsu, Muay Thai, kickboxing, boxing, like prior to it, but it was just one of those things where I would go from like dojo to dojo, teacher to teacher, not necessarily finding my way. I have a background in fitness, bodybuilding, and all kinds of stuff like that, but always having an interest in the martial arts, the spirit of the thing. Yeah.
And so this, working with Dan, and so who is now your sensei, and Dan sensei as well, you found that meeting of spiritual and martial arts that joined each other that was more attractive to you. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it was just authentic. Like it's not really fragmented like most other teachers teach. It connects this all to like how you live, whether it is through law, whether it's standing up for yourself, from what you eat to who you connect with, who you build with, where you go. So it's just on every single level, not separating like, okay, just throw punches and kicks, but like become an artist of life and learn how to live and defend yourself accordingly.
Right. It's a life thing. It's a lifestyle thing more so than, because when you start getting into the law and questioning the law, like Dan, you made me, and I'm sure Simon as well, question a lot of things that that the average person doesn't, and that I never really have. But when you start to go to the birth certificate and understand that the government certifies you as a human being, that's also like a corporation, and there's this weird ownership and trustee dynamic that we don't understand. But when you start to connect that with your body, with what your body can do, and your spirit, it's very powerful. I'm being attracted to it just speaking to you guys. Simon, do you want to give us a little something before you pop back out again? So Simon's having some internet difficulties up in Canada, but
I don't know what's going on.
Give us some insight before you pop back out.
Well, I think this is a really big part of this war, is taking all the craziness that's out there, because there is a maddening amount of information, and there are a lot of truths being revealed that are very intense. But practically, what do you do? I think this aspect of it, where it's like how you live is your participation in the war. It's really easy for people to forget. There's an allure to going into sort of like information rabbit holes and getting caught up in trying to sort of expose and punish elites. Not that none of that has relevance, but I think there are people giving so much energy to that and so much energy to the outrage machine that they don't just get their life so in order that they are living the sovereignty that is a direct response to the kind of enslavement that's being revealed.
Right.
Yeah, you spoke a lot about that, Dan, last time, is that you're not trying to get people to do anything. You're trying to essentially lead by example. And if people want to act in this way, then it's up to them. And ideally, we can all find this fulfillment in feeling like a sovereign individual, in having complete responsibility of ourselves and not having this link with the government. That's a weird ownership thing, but it takes work and it takes learning these things that otherwise are not that they're boring to the average person, but they're so fundamentally important to you as an individual. But a lot of people just skate through life without even thinking about themselves as a sovereign individual.
Well, you know, absolutely on that one. And there are a couple of additional pieces to that. You know, I was having a conversation with Akwasi knows. It's one of my other students. Her name's Tiffany, but she just happened to be. We bumped into each other the other day. She was talking about how she's having a bit of the anger struggles and everything like that. And a lot of the solution for that, whether it's the outrage or whether it's the challenges, whatever it may be, a lot of the solution to that is to actually do something about the thing. And where it kind of comes down to is, yes, like lead by example, you know, be the sovereign, do the thing, you know, don't just speak the words, but be the thing. One of the things that I have said and kind of put it out there to people a little more gently, right? But we're 4 years into it now, so I'm kind of easing off the gentle, and it's kind of time to go wake up, you know, like it's because we are facing an existential threat, and our latest court case proves what we already know, right? But again, Simon brought this up last time, where we, Kwasi, myself, the others of us who are doing things like this, it wasn't just the two of us in the court case, right? But in the actions as well. There are very few people in this country who have given the system as much of a try and given them, like, the actual men and women, because we often hear, oh, judges are people too, police are people too. We've given those people a chance to follow the rule of law, perform their duty and all those things hundreds of times throughout this entire 4 years. So now logic dictates, if we want to stop halal mortgages, if we want to stop like insane crushing economy, if we want to stop the bioweapon, if we want to actually stop this, we're actually going to have to take action ourselves. And that it's not a punishment action, right? It's a lawful action, not with the intent to punish, but the intent to restore justice and the rule of law. But I posed this question to a few groups that I did a speech to maybe 2 years ago. And I asked them, if you saw a child on the street, like an adult, come around and just out of nowhere, just kick the child, would you do something about it? And, the audience full of 100, 300 people, whatever, it was like, yeah, everybody like, yeah. Okay. If somebody came up to you on the street and kicked you in the shin, would you do something about it? Or would you just be like, hey, stop it. That was mad. That was mean. Don't do it. And everybody was like, yeah. And then I said, well, we're at war right now. Children are being injected with poisonous bioweapon. What have you done about it? Like you've paid your taxes. You paid for the bioweapon, right? Like you are under attack right now. Your government, it's gone. Your law, it's gone. Police, gone. It's made to look chill on the surface, but it's gone. So what are you doing about it? And this is where, even for folks that we deal with, right? That have done their status changes, right? This is, yes, that's a step, but it's so far beyond the idea of a status change, because ultimately, especially people that go really deep into the status change, they go, well, I need to improve my paperwork so that the government will leave me alone and put their stamp of approval on it. But they haven't
missing the point.
You know what I mean? Yes, exactly. Missing the point that this entity that's putting the stamp of approval on it was never legitimate to begin with. Therefore, even though you're saying, yeah, I want to exit the system, number one, you haven't actually dealt with the problem. And number two, if you really want to think of this in a universal concept, you really haven't performed your duty of care. Like, Pastor Art, Alberta, right? Like he's suing the government and the police and everybody for basically doing the same things that were done to us, right? Like his lawsuit against them, very, very similar to what was done to us and all of the things that we're bringing forward. The difference is he's using a lawyer, he's going through the courts, and he's like, well, I'm okay with this taking 10 years. That's a quote from him, right? But like 10 years isn't going to help people right now.
And he believes he's right, so he believes in the end he will win. And he might be wrong about that, because just like Kristen Nagel went through the system for slander against her, what's the term? Defamation against her by, I don't know if it was the CBC or one of these news organizations that called her a quack and wrote a hit piece against her. Yeah. She wound up losing and having to pay them. So that's what happens when you go through the system. It is not just. It is not this objective justice system that it should be. There's a lot of partisan judges. There's a lot of partisan lawyers and prosecutors, and politics has really infected everything. And when politics has infected the justice system, you're too far gone. It's broken.
Well, exactly. And that's not even just your or my opinion. I can't remember which newspaper it was, but it was, I think it was the National Post or something like that, right? But like one of the more conservative leaning newspapers, but they actually did a piece where they collected the data, used public records and everything like that. What they found out is it's some ridiculous number, like 70% of the judiciary had donated substantially to the Liberal Party, right? And then like, some judges were like former member, like it was just far too polluted and corrupt. And then again, we're dealing with not only an existential issue, but a systemic one as well, where unless, like us, you've actually tested the bloody thing, you don't know. So when you have a problem with the police, who do you get to investigate the police? Well, you file it with the OIPRD, the Ontario Police Independent Review Department, and then who investigates the police? Answer: the police. Oftentimes, the police from the exact same region as the complaint. So like we've done OIPRD things for the Halton police. Guess who investigated it? The Halton police. So like your buddy John from like 2 doors down is investigating you objectively? Sorry. And then when you go to the judges, well, when you have an issue with the judge, who investigates the judges? The judges.
And like, the crazy thing too is by extension they're investigating themselves because they are in the same position. So it's a complete conflict of interest for sure, but it's just not. It's just silly. Is the best way to put it. It's silly, but that's why what you're saying about going out of the system it's almost a non-participation thing. It's a declaration of non-participation in this broken system. But then the most important thing, I think, and we spoke about this last time, is building your own thing. Right, is building your own system of courts, your own system of justice, your own economic system over here, and say leave this, because at the end of the day, the government is us. That's what it's supposed to be, right? The government it's literally to be our extension, the extension of us. They are our trustees, as we spoke about with Vigilant News. That is not the case right now. They're like aristocrats that are just puppeteering the country and making us go broke, making us not be able to afford basic goods. It's a problem.
It is. It's a very, very big problem. And then this is where, court case, we faced it.
Let's get into that actually. You want to give us the rundown. So you just had the court case. It was last week, April 8th to 10th, you said, Monday to Wednesday. You want to give us a rundown on what the court case was, how it went, and result, and then where it's going.
Okay.
Please.
So just a quick recap. Everything started out with helping a single mother from keeping her one remaining daughter from getting the COVID bioweapon because the ex suddenly wanted to get her injected. That got kicked all the way up to the regional senior justice of appeal.
When she already lost her first daughter because of the same reason.
It was not the same reason. Good question.
not-
So
it
her
was not.
first daughter, couple of years older. Her first daughter was actually a medical malpractice with sick kids, but it was a misdiagnosed cancer treatment. She had a very weak system to begin with, so it was actually the chemotherapy that killed the daughter. So
Okay.
an unfortunate situation there, but in her mind, she was like, you know, if I'd taken myself and my kids out of the system before and had the proper tools to say that, like, okay, sick kids doesn't even have, and CAS don't even have a jurisdiction over my children, I might still have 2 children. Her words, not mine, right? I would never say something like that, but this is where we went, okay, if we can help you, we'll work with you. We'll figure something out. So it got moved up to the Regional Senior Justice Appeal, and, you know, Akwasi, myself, you know, a bunch of us from the assembly, we were assisting. That's when a couple of us got into court on December 8th, 2022. Leonard's the guy's name. Leonard didn't like what we said very much over there, but we used all the proper, you know, terms, declarations, everything like that. Yes, that's right. Yeah. So so he was just like, I just want the letters to stop. The letters that he spoke about were massive amounts of evidence and real people filing real crimes with real evidence and saying, like, hey, this is a thing. Like, there are criminal code claims here, there's scientific evidence, there's corporate evidence, there's SEC law, UCC law, like there's just law, like international covenant treaty law, and he just went la. So
so this is evidence accusing him of being criminally negligent.
That he said he read too. He said he read it too as well.
He said he read it, right? He gave you he said it on paper, or
nope.
he said it.
No, he said it live in the court. He literally held up the box and he goes, "See these letters right here?" And in my head, I'm like, jackpot. And I'm like, yeah, I do. And then he goes, "Do you know how disruptive these are to the court?" And I said, "You read the letters?" He said, "Sir, I read these letters." And I'm like, all right, either he just perjured himself by lying about that, or he admitted to criminal negligence from not acting upon any of that evidence.
The evidence was against him, or against the court system, or against, what was the evidence suggesting?
All of the above. It was massive amounts of evidence about the COVID bioweapon, massive amounts of evidence against the lieutenant governor and the politicians, other judges, police officers being criminally negligent, and then about the fraud of the courts and the fact that, you know, when you create a court case, a QSIP number is created, that QSIP number is used to trade and then make money and everything like that. It was literally all of the things. And then because of all of these things along the way, because of the international covenants and treaties, because of the fraud that you're committing right here, because of the COVID bioweapon, because of all of this, you have no jurisdiction. And because you didn't answer any of our lawful questions, like, what is your oath? What oaths are you operating under? We even found a company that was on a Government of Canada website that he and a couple of other people used to run. It's still up on the government website that had this man's address and a couple of other ones. But we were like, hey, is this company that's at Royal Bank Plaza in Toronto, is it still operational? Is there a conflict of interest here? We need to know as part of the disclosure. Never answered any of that stuff. So eventually he got a notice of lien from me. He didn't like that, so he sicked the cops on us, and then This is where we are now and today. So what last week was supposed to be, we treated it differently. So what the court said that it was supposed to be and what we made it into are two different things. So what the court said that it was supposed to be, because again, they're not legitimate. So we didn't treat it, and we repeatedly said that we are not participating in your process, because if we were to do that, we would be participating in an active crime right now. We are not participating in your fraud. We are not participating in this system. We are here to deal with your crime. We are here to stop your crime. Marcella, you are a criminal. These officers are criminals. here is the evidence. And then we asked the question. So what they said it was supposed to be was called a voir dire. A voir dire is where, so after we were detained in the police stations, all of us, we didn't have to give statements, but we did, because for each of us, we wanted separately, we wanted evidence on the record, and we wanted these statements on the record. So we didn't have to say anything. So the situation was under threat, duress, and coercion, but the words that we said were ours. We would have repeated them anyways. So the court had to determine, in their world, right, in their fraudulent world, they had to determine that our statements could be used on the record and that they were given voluntarily. So that was the supposed purpose of what we were there for. And we got to cross-examine the officers that were a part of each of these things, and the lead investigating detective, and what we got out of those officers while they were under oath was very, 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 very good. But again, it lends credence to everything we've done and our next step of the grand jury and the call to assemble a grand jury, because it's way beyond the point of necessity. So we went in there, and on the first day, the mother that, we kind of lost contact with back in September 2022, she did not appear. So they issued a warrant out for her arrest. Right. This is a single mother for a group of people who have literally done nothing but provide evidence and send letters. Imagine the resources that all of this takes to just to deal with a friggin' letter, right? But anyways, so in our half day, I gave them notices and statements and a USB drive. That USB drive contained the evidence from Gary Waterman from the UK and the fraud of Companies House that he'd revealed. We're talking links from governments and UK and Canada and all over the world to Epstein's companies, to real estate fraud, weapons manufacturing, court fraud, child kidnapping in courts, and just fraud. So literally, they were, and we even had the QSIP number from our case and what company that QSIP number was trading under, and we had that company and that fund and how much it was, $430 million. We literally had completely exhausted our burden of proof, right? Where it's okay, we have the QSIP number, we have the court case number, we have the fact that there's trade going on, we have all of these things. They're in a thumb drive right here. The judge, Marcella, you're committing, as the beneficiary of the trust, executor of these proceedings, you're committing fraud right now. This is a crime scene right now. I'm not, and then when I handed it to her, I'm I'm not giving you this evidence so you can make a ruling. You cannot make a ruling on your own fraud. You can't make a legitimate, and I said to her, if Leonard walked into this room right now and accused me of a crime, I'm not going to make a ruling on that. I would want a jury of our peers to actually be there, because that's how the rule of law works, right? You can't. So Marcella, you're a criminal. You can't make a ruling on your own fraud. We are not here to participate in the fraud, because if we do, we're criminally liable as well. So and then Akwasi had a bunch of things to say. It was really good. But the point being, we handed them insane amounts of evidence, which the Crown had never given her. The Crown had this stuff the entire, for about a year. She had none of it. So again, we gave her all the stuff. We gave her a USB drive. We had way more than exhausted the burden of proof, and she just kept on proceeding. And then, of course, we asked her, what is your oath? What is your authority to adjudicate? You say that I have the authority to adjudicate these matters. Where do you derive that authority from? What oath or oaths are you operating under right now? And then she repeatedly refused to disclose any of that.
Blah, 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 blah. What are you talking about? Here, have some Freedom 2.0. Man, the Constitution is awesome. That's what it is.
So
It's
did
it's
she
just a
openly
banana.
say, no, I won't disclose that, or what was the actual response?
At one point, it was, we're not going to go through that. I don't have to disclose any of that. And then, we were like, well, you do. Like you actually do.
They're confused when they're confronted with this, right? Because it's
Correct.
outside of the procedures of their system, right? It's like modern medicine, and they follow procedures, or modern science, they follow procedures.
Right.
They never actually question, let's say, the paradigm that it's functioning under. These judges and lawyers, they work within a system. They don't ever question the paradigm that's under, whether or not they actually have jurisdiction over this.
Exactly.
So that's where the challenge comes in, because you can't even, you're communicating with these judges that are otherwise at the highest echelon of the legal system, the legal system that we're claiming is illegitimate, and they can't even compute what you're trying to say to them.
Well,
right?
so I have a question.
It breaks their mind.
What legal knowledge would this judge have to have responded correctly? So what are they missing to be able to give you the true response that would be correct in your eyes?
Well, heart, mind, and soul, and human DNA. That would be one, right? But even if you think of like the proper rule of law, let's think of it this way. In terms of the rule of law, right? Like we go back to the very fundamental structure of it. If you think of an institution as a corporation, which they are, right? Like a literal registered corporation, that's not even a debate. If you go into like a Starbucks does not have authority over you. You know what I mean? Like they have policies. You can break their policies when you're a patron of Starbucks. Once you leave Starbucks, like that's not, they don't really have anything over you, right? And they certainly, like even when you're there, they certainly don't have the authority to put their hands on you or dictate your life or any way like that. Like it's a business in that way.
Unless you're violent, or then they have the right to defend themselves like anybody else.
Sure. Absolutely, yes, right? But when we think about people that are given extraordinary authority over and resources to deeply affect your life, i.e., a politician passing a law or whatever it may be, right? A police officer who's armed and ready to go when you're unarmed, a judge, all of these people, to give them the ability to do that, the way it's supposed to be is they take an oath, and that oath is supposed to mean something, right? Like it's supposed to put them on a lawful and moral standing to like a promise that they have to uphold to be able to give them those extraordinary powers.
Yes, powers over
people's lives.
But it requires consent, right?
Correct.
So if you consent to that, then if you can, let's backtrack a little. Canada is a sovereign nation, right? The argument by that not along, right? So you're gonna break that down in a second. The way normies and myself included, until I really start thinking about it, see it as Canada's a sovereign nation. It has borders. You are a citizen of Canada, so you are tacitly approving of Canada's legal system and the jurisdiction of politicians over you. If you are a citizen of Canada,
Right.
And there are certain regulations that are in place for you to, let's say, participate in common society. That's the way it's seen. So how do we backtrack from that and break that down into this idea that, and you spoke about this a bit last time with Canada not being a country, and there's a story also with, you know, it could have been a state of the United States. Was it you that brought that up? That
Yep.
Canada was going to be had the option of being one of the states in America.
Yes.
Let's backtrack that. Can you break down that again, please?
Yes. So you know what? It's even okay. Let's start from tacit agreement,
Mhm.
right? And everything you said, you know, regarding the citizen process. So part of that tacit agreement, and when somebody takes an oath to have these things, is like a promise that, like, okay, we don't always have to agree on the same things, but basically, we're going to function, and we're going to function so that even though we don't agree on everything, your fundamental human rights will be protected. That's part of the tacit agreement as well, right? And
that's at the foundation of everything.
It's literally the foundation of everything. Yeah, in a free society, right? Well, if one side breaks that agreement, now all parties.
So that's even within the system.
Yes, all parties must revisit that agreement because it's been broken. And even in a simple logical sense, you can't have the people who broke the agreement ruling on whether they broke the agreement or not. Do you know what I mean? And then again, that same oath of office, right? In Canada, whether it's a police officer, judge, politician, doesn't matter. They take an oath to the crown and to, at this point, King Charles, right? But when you revisit those tacit agreements and that oath, which is where they derive their authority from, because that's the point of the question, right? Number one, if you are acting under your oath and you're upholding your oath, there are rules that go along with that oath. For example, a lot of the judges say, well, the international covenants and treaties don't apply to Canada. If you took an oath to King Charles, number one, that's a common law oath. Common law applies. The law of the land applies. Number two, the king or the queen, because Queen Elizabeth ratified these two. The international covenants and treaties were ratified by the crown, meaning they apply. You can't have it both ways.
Again, this is within the system. So what I would ask you is, do we recognize the king and queen as legitimate authorities over us as well?
They do.
They do,
right?
Yes.
That's their system, right? They do, because if you're in a court case and you're being prosecuted, it's King Charles versus these guys,
right?
So
can I one step back? So a lot of this stuff, the problem with it, and the biggest challenge in spreading the information is making it not abstract to people, because like we've said before, if you're on the street and somebody's kicking a child, that's clearly child abuse. But if the government is forcing a child to wear a mask, in my eyes, it's clearly child abuse. That is a crime that is being committed, right? So for a lot of people, though, especially with this mass psychosis that happened during the past couple of years, it's a lot more abstract to them. They're like, well, that's fine. They need to be wearing a mask because they're protecting other people, blah, 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 all that nonsense. But so we have to bring this back. But so to put a couple material examples, we have the right in Canada, let's say, even within the system, of assembly, right to movement, right to free speech. So movement,
right,
assembly,
fair trial.
Speech, fair trial. All of these things were clearly violated in the last couple of years.
Yes,
these are very blatant and very, very concrete examples of how they have abdicated their duty to honor their oath.
Well, and let's take it, because we mentioned this in the court case as well. And again, crickets. But we talked about the fact that, the initial judge, Leonard Ricchetti, was hired and appointed by David Lametti. David Lametti is absolutely a part of the liberal crime syndicate, right? So, like, you've got that connection along the way. And then there's even in the National Citizens Inquiry, they talked about how the Superior Court judges, which was the highest provincial judges that Leonard is one of, are appointed federally. Well, the Constitution, Section 91, 92, 93, clearly states that one level of government can't what's the word? Transfer powers and responsibility to another, right? So you can't have a federally appointed judge act on the highest provincial level. That's not even just us reading that ourselves. That was one of the conclusions. I think it was Section 7 in the Commissioner's final report of the National Citizens Inquiry. Like, this is not just a couple people that have come to this conclusion, right? Like, these are just straight up facts. So we're dealing with a judge that was not even legitimately appointed, and they're just weaponizing the whole system against the people that are actually doing something against it. So, even Michael, to go back to your point, Simon talked about this too, obviously, and we're all agree with this, right? The whole idea of creating something parallel or separate, like, let's be clear, they have no intention to allow that to exist. So the
whole point is we don't give it, we don't give an F.
Yes.
I don't care. We're building our house over here. Your house is crumbling. Your house is corrupt. It's a crime syndicate is the best way to put it, really. And they built up this system around it. Like, it's a lot more obvious if you go to Brazil with Lula, the president there now, but he was clearly the election in Brazil, and you can't even say this, so I won't say this, but clearly there was some shenanigans in the election in Brazil. And this guy appointed the judge that released him from jail so that he can run for office. It's a lot more obvious there. Here in Canada, it's becoming so obvious with Justin Trudeau, right? There's time and time again where there is the ethics commissioners and these investigations that are showing that these are crimes. Any human being with any humility, with any honor, would have stepped down.
And we brought up, because they're saying it in Parliament right now. We brought this up in court. Like, they're using the word treason.
Absolutely.
In the Parliament.
And so
right now,
the thing that I'm getting at here is that the modern culture today, on the leftist culture, the Marxist, neo-Marxism, and postmodernism, what it does at its root is essentially say postmodernism, and Jordan Peterson talks about this. Basically, they're saying that there is no truth, right? That everything is subjective. And that's where we get to now, because Justin Trudeau can easily go in Parliament and say, that's not true. Okay, here's the evidence. Here's, tons of evidence, like you guys are doing. You committed these crimes. You have admitted to this. Essentially, we have the paper trail. Money was transferred here. There's $250 million you sent. Oh no, that is fine. We had our judge investigate, and we are, that's all they got to do. They just got to say it. So we're at a point where it's completely absurd and completely illegitimate. But sorry, continue. And I'd like to, in a second, Akwasi, can you give us your experience in the court as well, in the most recent court case and throughout? And Dan, you said that you had something to say in the court, Akwasi. Can you break that down a little bit for us? Maybe start with that, and then Dan, you can continue, because I know you can continue for hours.
I've never heard that before.
The whole court situation was like what Sensei was saying, where they weren't providing their authority. They weren't providing their oaths. They were pretty much just, okay, you guys need to do this, follow our procedures, and whatever you're saying, we're not going to listen to.
They were relegating to the system itself that we are saying is illegitimate. Is that fair? Is that?
And at the same time, they're not looking at what we're saying in evidence of, like, okay, like, we're saying it's illegitimate. We're saying this is fraud, but you're not looking at why we're saying this is fraud. So we look crazy. Like, we're not just coming in there saying conspiracy theories and saying all these things. Like, we have legitimate facts and evidence of why this is fraud. So it was pretty much them just being cowboys and forcing everything, what they were trying to say, of making us do a voluntary plea and all these other things. But they're just, the way I kind of see this is as people, as, you know, what this is going to come down to, whether we want to build our house on off the grid or this, that, and the other, is we can't be afraid, because it's pretty much a game of chicken. And that's what it felt like, or it looked like in the courts, or anytime you deal with a police officer, because whether they're ignorant, which is just as bad, or they're just choosing to play stupid, like they don't know what's actually true. In the back of their head, they're just like, okay, I'm gonna still force this because I have backup, I have people. That's the biggest difference between us and them, is that, like, they have a team, whether they force their agents to abide by their rules to actually do something, but like, we as humanity have to come together so that we have a team. You get what I'm saying? Because if one of us builds our house off grid and a police officer or a bunch of people come to that house and be like, okay, you don't own this land, then what? Are you going to be able to stand up then? If you're going to be able to stand up then you should be able to stand up now, where it's like, okay, like, what can I do? But we're so separated where we're holding on to just what we have. So that creates fear, so that when we're talking to a police officer, or where we don't want to go to the courts, or when we're getting angry, like Sensei was talking about when he was talking to one of the people from our assembly, that's really where it starts, because it gets simple, where it's like, just, you have to let go and just do the thing of like, okay, there's a problem here. You know what I mean? Like, even if it's just that analogy or metaphor of a child getting kicked on the street. Okay, what if it's this big muscular guy kicking that child? Are you going to do something then? It's still going to be a risk.
Very good point.
Because that's the thing. It's like, people are thinking like, oh yeah, I'll stand up for a child, but okay, what if it's 10 guys with guns? Are you gonna, you get what I mean? So it's like, you can't, the bottom line of this, and like beyond all the law and all these things, is that like, just go and do it, because the only reason that they have us here is because we're scared. It doesn't matter what we really know with the books and all that stuff. It's just do the thing. You get what I'm saying? Because
absolutely,
how many podcasts, how many, you know, Jordan Petersons, or tons of David Icke books and all these things that are out there. It's like, there's so much information, but like, it almost, not to disregard it, because it's very important to have the information, empower yourself. But like, again, taking it back to the martial arts, like, you can learn the blocks and the kicks and the punches, but will you use them when it's necessary? And you can't, in the sense of executing something, you can't be like, okay, I'm afraid to do that, because that hesitation will already have you defeated. So that's what, when it comes to like a call to action, when it comes to what we did in court, the big emphasis is just, we have to really unify and actually come together, so that if someone does come to, let's say, your house, like you're talking about, I'm going to build my place over here. If someone does come to your house, who are you going to call? They have people to call. You say no to the one police officer that says, okay, you know, this property is ours. He comes back with 10 people. What are you going to do? So like, humanity has to understand that, okay, like, my child isn't just my child that lives in my house. Like, my child is my neighbor's child. My child is that child in overseas, or in Europe, or wherever it may be. You get what I mean? Like, we have to kind of go back to that mentality.
Humanity.
Yeah, like, not so left-sided. Like, we have to understand that it's a oneness, because if that's left apart, we're just going to keep talking about this thing over and over and over again. Because like, how many books do you need to read to stand up for your brother? Like, just do the thing, because ultimately, if you don't do the thing, they're just going to come and do it to you.
But, you know, that really comes back to contracts, right? That we have to have a sense of service to our community. You know, there should be some sense of service, or an oath, or some commitment that we have to our community, to the people around us, to humanity, that we should be operating from. You know, I think that seems to be a part of what's going on here, that if you look to the authority that they allegedly have, and you find no real agreement that it's operating upon, and you start to understand that humans need clear agreements, we need contracts, And sometimes those contracts are social, fine, but we still do need, contracts that are effective, that both parties are aware of to operate. And that also does seem to come down to, what is your oath to your community as an individual? Who or what are you here to serve in this world? I mean, for me, it's very clear when you have a family, like, I think in some ways parents have a huge advantage, because when you have children in this world, your legacy is right in front of you. And you're like, okay, well, I got to stand up for my legacy. I got to defend that. But I think that it's not super clear to people yet, the real situation that they are in. And I guess part of that is because there's layers to move through. There is the awkward layer of waking up to the war itself. And then there's all the traps within that are like drawing you into fights that aren't the real fight.
That's the thing, because like we don't have that, like, we have to communicate, like, even just talking to people in the streets or anything, like, you can see this wall that they don't want to talk about it. Like, you can obviously look at your child and be like, okay, like, this is my legacy I'm going to protect, because you guys talk and communicate as a family. We're all separately doing these things, but like, most people won't defend the risk their life for someone's, they don't even know their name or what they believe in and all that stuff. Like, these people are enemies. They probably meet up every day. Like, they're constantly communicating. Like I said, whether it's by force or like,
and we're paying them to do that.
That's the thing, but we're not
paying them to conspire against us.
And that's the thing. Like, so stuff like what you guys are doing with getting this stuff out there, it's great. But like, even for people who are going to be watching, or like, how you guys plan on acting out and doing your part, like, we have to really figure out how to come together and like actually communicate and then execute, plan and perform. You know what I mean? Because that's really in the courts. Like you can come up with all this law stuff, all these things, but they're just telling you, like, realistically, they're looking at you like, no, like, we have guns.
Exactly.
That's all they're like. It doesn't matter. Like,
the mafia.
We'll show them that, like, okay, the criminal code, this, whatever it may be, everything that like even shows our jurisdiction, our status. They're just saying that, okay, yeah, but like, remember, we have guns, we have jails, we have people, we have plans, we have actual playbooks. Like, we're planning, we're ahead of you. Like, what do you guys have? But
like, we're the bigger gang. We're the big come F with us. We're the bigger gang.
But if we were set up like that, where we were strong and united, and like, you know what I mean, like, then we could actually do something.
Why do you think they want to take away the guns in the States? And why do you think they got rid of the guns here?
Like that's I don't think that's also a solution, because again, now that's
a different thing, but
it's more of a mental thing, like just coming together. Like, we can't, if we're gonna do this thing of war, fear can't be in mind, or we already lost.
No,
really, that's what it is. Because if it's about a thing about how many guns I can have, and like, they have guns too, so like, is this gonna be again a repeat? We have to figure out how we can break this cycle. We've been
yeah. See, I'm sorry to interrupt, man, but you asked me a question a little earlier today, and you just answered your own question.
What did I ask you?
When it comes to the grand jury and the action that we're going to do on June 3rd, and you asked me, well, what's going to stop them from doing X? And where you just said, when you go into these things, you can't even have fear in your mind. You can't even have the doubt in your mind.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And that's what
it's a Gandhi approach almost. It's more of a Gandhi approach than it is a have a civil war approach.
Because like, if you're like, I don't know, I think it just comes down to this. I talk to people too, and people, like, everyone talks about this, but it's like, it always comes down to like, okay, like, I want to be able to feed my kids, and I want to be able to live my life. I want nice things. Like, we even had a police officer come up to us and thank us for doing his job in his own words.
In the court,
right? Last week, he came up saying that's like, thank you so much for what you're doing. But like, you get paid to do that. You're saying that you would do this, but you want to protect your kids. But we have lives to live too. Like, how am I so good that I can't die while other people have died for this already? Like, why do we think that we can't do the right thing because we don't want to lose stuff, when there are people who have been losing things because they know what's more important, like what's the priority. You're not going to think about, oh, I'm going to lose my job if I'm about to defend my kid. So it's like, it's really, until you break that barrier, all these other things really don't matter, because you're not going to use it when the time comes up. Like, you need to just do the thing and understand that all this material vanity is not gonna, it's your prison, it's your ticket into prison, the material vanity, really. Like, your house, these things that they tell you, or you've set yourself up to have, that's what's keeping us separated. Because it's like, I'm not gonna help you, I don't want to lose that. That's what it comes down to. So when we assemble and when we bring a jury, that's really, anybody can read, but it's like, will you use it?
And that's, Simon kind of mentioned something earlier about the simplicity of, when you've got family. And there's truth to that, but there's also a trap to that.
Right.
And, with the idea of like service to self versus service to others, and even the word samurai actually means one who serves, right? So it's again something that's deeply ingrained in the martial arts. But the trap that I hear a lot of, because a lot of parents come up to us and say, "Oh my gosh, like thank you. I would do what you are doing if I didn't have kids." I call bullshit on that, but you get trapped in an illusion of selflessness. But really, if you think about it, when you're talking and you're saying, and like this cop that thanked us, and I talked about, Sergeant Paul Brown from his own region. He's like, "Yeah, I know Paul." And I'm like, "Right, well, Paul stood up to us and he's like, well, I can't do what Paul did because I got to feed my kids." Paul has fucking kids too.
That's the thing. Like, it's crazy.
But he did the right thing, right? So like you got a bunch of people that are doing this to us and going, "Oh, I don't," like literally saying, "I don't want to do this, but I got to feed my family. I got to progress my career." And when you really analyze it, the first word when you talk about your family or your kids is my family, my kids. There is an element of selflessness, but there is an element of selfishness as well. You are serving yourself, not the greater good, like rather than saying a suggestion, rather than saying, "I need to protect my children," why not shift it to, "I need to protect the children"? Through doing that, you will protect your children. But like I said, the world is at risk right now. You can build, but and like there's a document written by an Alberta law professor, several papers. True North Guardians and Lakeshore Sovereign Assembly were included in it. Christopher James included in it. Kevin Annette and like the country of Canada included in it. All about the people that have actually been doing stuff for all these times. And his entire thing is deal with the pseudo legal stuff. And he, twists it and neglects certain key facts and all of those other kinds of things. But at the end of it, he literally said the pseudo legal arguments need to be studied and suppressed. The intention of this system is to suppress us, and we know what they mean by suppress. So it doesn't matter, like Akwasi said, it doesn't matter if you build your house over there or you build your farm over there. They are coming for it. And if, like Akwasi, that was awesome, man. Like, if you can't deal with it now, you won't deal with it then. Realistically. Like I've seen people do all this common law stuff and be like, "Oh yeah, I have all the proper documents, I got the land." Officer shows up at the house, boom, they cave.
Yeah.
Right? And who's to say when you build your separate community and everything like that, that you will defend it or have the community defend it or the know-how to defend, or really ultimately the spirit to defend it, right? This is where, Akwasi's seen it, but I went through it because he came in the aftermath. But like within our organization and our folks, like Sensei had talked about this stuff for a very long time. He ran security for David Icke when he visited the GTA back in the 90s, right? And a bunch of other things. He's been dealing with this issue since the mid 80s. And all of these students of his, legitimately badass dudes that could actually fuck you up. Like They knew their stuff inside and out, and had it been road tested, so to speak, right? But like 2020 comes along, all of them fell. All of them, -1. And that's it. Like tens of thousands of students affected.
So,
right.
Simon, were you going to say something before I go on a bit of a diatribe?
There's one thing that I thought would be helpful to communicate, which is, had the judge disclosed their oath and their authority, you guys still would have had something to work with here, right? It's not like that would have been a big blow to you. So can we just go down that hypothetical of, okay, the judge discloses, their oaths and the authority under which they're operating. So what might that have looked like? And then what would you guys have had in response to that?
Excellent question. Yeah. So, if they disclose their oath, right? Well, and the proper answers, like not the ones that we're dictating, like the literal actual answers to those questions. What oath are you operating under, right? Well, and we say oaths because a bunch of them can be like Freemason oaths, maybe they're Jesuit, like they need to disclose what oaths they are operating under. But let's say, it's just an oath to King Charles and uphold, the interests of the crown and right? I forget word for word what the oath is, but it's actually very similar to a police oath. And it's basically like, uphold the fundamental rights and the crown. Anyways, the point being, I kind of touched on it earlier, but if you admit to taking an oath right off the bat, like you put your hand on a Bible, or even they're doing a lot of we had a mix of these for the officers in court, who also, by the way, the lead detective and the Crown admitted under oath that they had not read all of our evidence before they came to arrest us. So we had Criminal Code of Canada complaints, thousands of pages of evidence, and like all of this proof, and like the notice of lien was literally like, because of your failure to answer all of this stuff and break all of these laws and and like your failure to answer before court, during court, and you've continued to harm me. I continue to be a victim because of that notice of lien, which you have an opportunity to rebut. This is just a first statement. So nothing threatening about it whatsoever. Anyways, so when they said, oh, well, that was an intimidating letter. Well, what was intimidating? Nothing, right? The statements that they also make while they're under oath, if they lie about it, it's perjury. So that's one important thing too, which is a crime. And another one is that if they're operating under their oath and they fail to do something that's part of their duty, that's criminal negligence and obstruction of justice. So you nail them on a crime right there. But in addition to that, when you take an oath, you've just taken a common law. So for us to claim that we have status under a common law jurisdiction because living men and women cannot deal with a corporation, living men and women have to deal with living men and women, and the jurisdiction is common law, you can't say that you're operating under a common law oath and not acknowledge the jurisdiction of common law, right? And in addition to that, we touched on the international covenants and treaties when you talk about the right to self-determination, when you talk about even in, I think it's like paragraph 3 on the UN, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, International Covenant and International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Geneva Convention, all those things. When you claim to be invoking those international covenants and treaties, and their oath is to somebody who has declared and ratified those covenants and treaties, you can't have it both ways. So the individual, the crown, or the crown corporation that you derive your authority from, acknowledges those laws and says that they're part of the country's laws. They are acknowledged in the Emergencies Act that put us in this whole bloody thing to begin with, right? Like the Emergencies Act cannot violate the international covenants and treaties. So like the fundamental human rights or any of those things. It says it right there in the Emergencies Act. So the point being, when you talk about oaths, and where you're deriving your authority from, and you invoke those same laws, you are literally catching them on their own bullshit right there. Because then when you're like, okay, well, here's our proof, here's the evidence, here are the laws, here's what your role is supposed to be, and you're literally, pardon my French, you're just making shit up right now. You are literally making up law as you go along, but the law that you're deriving your authority from already exists, and you are refusing on the public record to answer any of these questions. And she even talked about like the burden of proof and proof beyond reasonable doubt. Well, my God, like you literally have to, no pun intended, justify your authority to be a justice of the peace, right? Like we have come in peace. We've presented evidence to the proper authorities. We have acted out of not just our interests, but the interest of all. And we need to know, because the tacit agreement has been violated, the societal contract is violated, the law has been violated. So again, we have to go back to square one. Are you operating under your oath? And if the answer is yes, then everything I just said applies, and you violated that. If the answer is no, or I'm not going to answer, in which case no response is a response, in which case you've literally just admitted you have no authority to adjudicate these proceedings. So like you've got them in checkmate. I mean, they can just proceed. Don't get me wrong.
It's like we were saying before, nothing means anything to them, so they just make it up as they go.
But then it becomes like, again, it's codified in law already, let alone universal law. But like then it becomes our duty to actually restore that rule of law. And this is where we get into June 3rd and the necessity under the Magna Carta, the common law, international covenants and treaties, all of these things. It becomes our duty to assemble a grand jury because of all these things, right? Like you can't really just assemble a grand jury of 25 people and just come at them. You have to show on the public record.
Is the grand jury outside of their system?
No.
It's within that system. You have legal precedent to be able to form a grand jury and
lawful precedent, because lawful. Like the people need a recourse for a corrupt government.
Right.
Right.
And so at the end of the day, though, we do agree that we want to live in a legal framework where we all consent to this legal framework.
Lawful.
Can you differentiate those two?
Yeah, legal's referring to admiralty law, the law of the sea, and like the corporate system, that kind of thing. Lawful is like living men, women, law of the land, that kind of thing, right? So and the original rule of law.
Okay. So at the end of the day, this boils down to, or the crux of this is that we are at war. And so there's a line in the Declaration of Independence. It's when a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably the same object evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right and it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. That's actually where I got the name for my YouTube and media thing. It's the New Guards. But so the idea there presented in the Declaration of Independence is that if it is a despotic government, which we can attest to and we can declare, I think we need new declarations in general. So oaths, declarations, and conventions, constitutional conventions, to form a system that we consent to. Because now there is a tacit consent by just being born in this country, right? We never consented to these things. Jefferson has writings where he was talking about the crown and over the crown's authority over the colonies, but he was saying, I find it more and more likely that one generation has no more right to subjugate another or to bind another to its laws than a foreign entity has the authority to bind another nation over to its laws. Does that make sense? So
Makes a lot
one
of
generation
sense, yeah.
to the next, there's no consent. We're living within the system that was formed by people that are no longer alive, people that we've never met, that they've never asked us for our consent. But then there is a tacit consent, there is an implicit consent by accepting it, by living within the system. Because if you live within the system, you file your paperwork and you do all these things, then you're saying that I acknowledge you as legitimate.
Yes.
To put something into the ether, and then we can discuss it. We're at war. We're in a fifth generation warfare situation, which makes it very complicated. Not everybody knows what that even means. But we are in a war where we don't know who the enemy is. The enemy is not another nation. It's not this tangible group of people. It is people, and there are people that we can put on that side. And I would put, let's say, George Soros and Bill Gates and these people that are planning to subjugate us under a new world order, and Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum and these people. So there is an enemy, but it's more abstract than a nation against another. It's more abstract than Russia against Ukraine, which is a whole, we don't need to talk about that. That's a lot of nonsense. But so how one of our biggest challenges is waking people up to the idea that we're at war, right? And we talk about this a lot, Simon. That is one of the cruxes of what we're trying to do with Liberty North, is to explore and to present to people and make people understand that we are in fact at war with people that will subjugate us. And then if we take it back one step further, Yuri Bezmenov, who you guys are probably familiar with, talked about ideological subversion, and essentially that we are so subverted ideologically that we will not realize we're at war until we're in concentration camps getting a kick to the ass. And that's too late. That's what you're saying, Akwasi. It's too late if you're not going to fight now. But so it's hard for people to grasp that, of where it can go. And go ahead.
Because that's the question I wanted to ask. Like, why do you think people aren't coming together? Because, like, I don't know, like we all do. Like, I spend a lot of time just thinking of, like, okay, like, this has been going on way before, just 4 years, but just in, like, humanity in general. Like, we've had history of little groups coming together, defending their communities. I don't know if you guys ever heard of the Black Pea Stones in Chicago way back in the like, I want to say maybe 80s, but ultimately they were just a group that would come together and assemble and defend their community against police brutality, right? And they weren't using law or books or this, that, and the other, but like they were just coming together and seeing, let's say, a police officer or somebody in authority doing something wrong and showing up. Not even always in acts of violence, but just showing up. Because when you have 50, 100 people come to, let's say, the scene of a crime, and you're maybe 5 police officers or 1 police officer, or in our case, a crown, a judge, and a couple of police officers in a courtroom, what are you going to do? Are you going to attack and brutalize all of us, 100 people, 500 people? Like, how many humans are on this planet? Because it really just gets down to that point, because we can't, the paperwork and all that stuff, I believe, was supposed to give us light to what's really true if we already didn't know. But now it's the time of, like, okay, we have to just show up, because they are coming for you. You can't keep flinching. Like, the truck is coming. You have to just not let this illusion overwhelm you, and understand that coming together, asking yourself, your family, your groups, how can we do that? Because why hasn't humanity already did that? That's where I'm seeing the biggest conflict, is that all of us, not daily, making this the #1 priority, our lives, how we're going to go about, how the next generation to come is going to have somewhere to live. That's not this digital prison. You get what I'm saying?
It's like the truck's coming at you, but you know what? Let's read about the engine. Let's read about, you know what? I want to study how that engine works. You're dead.
Exactly. You have to, because you said something about a system too, but nature has a system. We don't have to create another system. Like, we already have something that's God given. So it's remembering that. Like, it's a very simple thing, but the whole reptilian agenda and all these things that they've put into our minds, it's complex. Like, they made it very complex. Like, we need this and that, like Sensei was talking about, oh, my paperwork needs to be perfect, and I need to do this and that, and like people are going from one way to another way to all. It's just other types of confusion, and that's also what the alternative or the new alternative media is doing to people, where they're just throwing out more information, calling it truth, whether it's Elon Musk or all these other people. Like, that's not really the point. Just get back to your nature. You can't it's the mind that is trapping this and putting us here. It's not anything else. So that's why one of the questions I wanted to ask, even to people watching this or even to you, like, you know, what would you do, or what, not that you guys aren't doing anything, because you are, like, you're exposing truth and you're doing this stuff, but like in the now moments of like, what can I do? Like, you know, this is my life, these are my resources. What can I bring to the table of, you know, the right side of things, like the truth side of things? Because that's what it comes down to. It's not about what you know or how many criminal codes you have down pat. It's what am I going to do now with what I have? What do I need to fix? What do I need to, you know, make solid a foundation so I have something to stand on? Because if you don't have that, then they're going to just walk over you. You get what I mean? Like, it's a simple idea of come together and don't flinch.
You know, there's like something that I think can help us distinguish two really important ideas that we've touched on today, because there's the one idea that, you know, if you have children, your legacy is right in front of you and you can use that as inspiration to take correct action. But we also talked about the fact that that's a trap for a lot of people, because they'll use their children as an excuse to maintain a lifestyle, you know, to just keep things comfy and cozy and easy for as long as possible to avoid. And I think one of the things that I've tapped into to develop a more advantageous mindset is to look at children the way our enemy sees children. Our enemy wages a war on the future. They have an understanding of, if we do this to this generation, it will end up 3 generations down the line like this. This is the way that they have operated. So they perceive this war through time, and they perceive children as legacy. And I think, you know, my mindset as a parent has really shifted around that, right? It's not just about protecting my children now. That's really short-sighted. I am in a war with this enemy for the future, for many generations down the line. And so there may be sacrifices I have to make now, right, and forms of discomfort and struggle that are correct for me to endure right now, because my mindset is like that of my enemy. And I think that, you know, we have been engineered into thinking in smaller ways. For example, within the realms of, you know, political cycles, you know, people think, you know, it's like people get trapped in these smaller ways of thinking. So I think there's a mindset shift there, where your children become symbolic of something different, where you begin to, in some ways, there's an admiration for the enemy's capacity here. I mean, that's been a way for me to transmute what's going on, is to really study the way that we've been trapped here, the way that we've been attacked, and be like, okay, well, you know, their capacity to think in terms of many generations is actually a really powerful thing. And how can I think like that? Well, you know, some of the things that we've done is we've decided to unschool our children. So we decided to never put our children in the public schooling system. Amazing. That was something that was very costly for us, right? We had to agree as a family, we're going to have less income, but our children are going to be with us. And during their formative years, they will be with us. And that may impact our lifestyle, but not only are we able to then guide our children and support them correctly and protect them from a lot of what's going on, but we can build a legacy of free thought, and we can give our children the capacity to not only think freely, but to pass on that capacity throughout the generation. So I think, you know, there's a mindset shift here where your children become symbolic of that which the enemy has always seen them as, which is just a gateway to the future. And I think when you really start to conceive of that as clearly as the enemy has, you do start to see that there are struggles and sacrifices right now that are correct, and that it's not really just about staying safe and comfy and cozy and then saying you're just defending your children.
The quote, just quickly, the quote the average man does not want to be free, simply wants to be safe, I think is at the root of a lot of this, because there, even though we can do this, and we can, you know, declare our non-participation and declare the illegitimacy of this structure that's being built, many people want to stay in that structure. So it's not just taken for granted that everybody wants this. Not everybody wants the responsibility to be their own sovereign individual, their own. People want the feeling of being in something that daddy government is protecting them. Many people want that. Many
Absolutely.
people want the Medicare system, even though it's broken and horrible. It's horrendous. They you know, you still tout free healthcare in Canada. Yeah, you don't want our healthcare system.
So do you think people can think their way out of this?
I think people fundamentally, a lot of people do not necessarily, and I think Simon's right, the word engineered is the right term. People have been socially engineered to not want to be completely in control of everything in their lives. They want to be told what to do in many ways. Am I about to pop out now? I just froze, eh?
Yeah, he froze.
Wait, hold on. It'll come back.
But I can hear you.
Go ahead. Yeah, there's the cat. All right.
There it is.
So I don't know. I think that people, you know, and that's why it's so important what Simon's doing with homeschooling. In school, in the school system, you are very much engineered to take different stimulus and adapt that into your being and your complete understanding and framework of the world. And if we go back to the education system, it was the Rockefellers that took over the education system, and it is not conducive to people being free individuals. It's really it really engineers people into this 9-to-5 schedule, and you know, it should change. If we actually have the intent of educating children to be free thinking, critical thinking human beings, the school system today is not where it's at. So I don't know. To answer your question, I'm not answering your question, but I don't know is my answer.
I want to answer that question. I think it's a super important question, because I think like we are way too caught up in the mind. I think that the mind is a major obstacle to what's going on. You know, there is a sense of inner authority that we each have, to my understanding, but it comes from a sense of embodiment. I think there's a role for the mind in you know, the path moving forward, but I really feel like our inner authority is operating outside of the mind. I don't think that's really how it functions. And you know, for us as a family, you know, we've come to understand that dynamic of the body and the mind through the lens of human design. And I won't go into that right now, but the point is that you know, we are capable of being guided, I think, by our bodies, by being embodied in a way that can move us more precisely through life than trying to do constant mental gymnastics and trying to get stuck in rabbit holes of knowledge. I think that, you know, the mind's capacity to be of service right now has more to do with outer authority. So that means what you gather with your mind, it's good for sharing with others. And I think that's a really important role for all of that, all of this knowledge gathering and all that. It's great for sharing with others. But in terms of making personal decisions, right, I think you have to be a deeply embodied individual, and you have to have the capacity to make decisions with a quiet mind. You know, what is occurring when your mind is quiet? To me, there is a capacity to be guided by that which lies beyond the mind, those capacities that we have. And, you know, even some of that gets into, you know, like brain science and things like that. But we are very entrenched in the left hemisphere. And the only reason that's really relevant is because it's our right hemisphere that deals with meaning that goes beyond language,
right?
Meaning outside of language. So, you know, to me, I would say that we need to be moving.
But that's a programming, right, Simon? That is the programming that has happened. We don't need to be so entrenched in the left hemisphere.
Yes, some of it's programming, and some of it's just a result of the way humans have progressed. We progressed to gain control over the material realm. So when the Industrial Revolution came forward, we became enamored with the material world, but kind of out of necessity because our awareness was moving deeper into the material realm. How do we manipulate this realm? How do we develop technology, right? So as we were gathering more control over the material realm, our left brain became very enamored with that and developed alongside it. And it just so happens that that development of the Western brain also makes us very susceptible to the social engineering that causes all of this to get much, much worse. So to me, it's sort of, some of it is the natural conditioning of how humans were going to progress, and some of it is the social engineering and the weaponization of a lot of things.
Because what I was getting at as well with that whole idea of like, can we think our way out of this? Like, I believe we need to fuse both sides of the brain and go into that idea of full self-realization, because with doing the action, like you mentioned that you homeschooled your children, like maybe at first it was like, okay, this is going to be risky. You kind of went through an analyzation, but you didn't let that cycle on. You just ended up acting, and through the actions came results, led to more actions and more results that fed your mental inventory in a positive way, which led you to more actions. So like with people overthinking of like, okay, what I need to do, should I show up and be a part of this jury? Should I not? That like, you have to just understand what's at stake, which we all do, but then just do something. And that's going to support your mental thought process. That's going to start to make you see more as you do. Like going down that tunnel and you just have a lamp showing you a few feet ahead of you. You have to move forward if you want to, go forward through all the darkness, but have your light. You have to be able to act and then let that start to plant the seeds in your mind for positivity so that you can actually see more and not be so trapped in the conflict of I know this is right, but then I have my family. That almost kind of creates a cognitive dissonance where it's like, the system's wrong, but at the same time, you're saying you're going to protect your children by being safe within the system. And that's, most people lose sleep over that, right? So with just acting, it really, that's the ultimate solution I see here, is just, we have to figure out in our own ways, in our own lives, like, how do I contribute? What am I going to bring to this table? How am I going to act? And I can't be thinking at the same time, am I safe? You're not safe. You're already unsafe.
Exactly.
Blah, 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 blah. What are you talking about? Here, House of Freedom 2.0. Now, the Constitution is awesome. That's 1A.
Yeah, well, they talk about this, in the Citizen's Guide to Fifth Generation Warfare. There's a principle called dominate the physical domain. And they're very emphatic about that because it's understood that the majority of fifth generation warfare is waged in the digital domain, that the majority of the mind control and the psychological warfare is really now in the media and digital domain. And it's important that we dominate our physical domain as a means of cutting through that mind control and all of that deception and information warfare. And dominating the physical domain means developing in-person networks. It means getting connected to your community and understanding this war beyond what you see on the internet and looking at, how is this war impacting my community specifically? Because it may not look like that video I just saw on the internet. So, forming these physical networks and relationships, they encourage you to go and find people in your community that have skill sets that you don't have. Make a list of the people that are mechanics, nurses, plumbers.
Right.
Form these networks so that if your life moves in a way where you're needing to build a sovereign community, where the internet goes down or anything like that, you're already in a position to live within these decentralized networks that are self-sustaining. And so, I think some of those actions are really practical. Anyone could do that. You could go right now and make a list of the people you physically know that have skill sets that you don't have. You could go make that list today. You could start it. And then you have the beginnings of a sovereign network. You have a practical step right there, and you start to see the gaps in your network too, right? Like, oh shit, I don't know a single mechanic. I know 0 plumbers. Whatever that is, So I think some of that's really good, actionable, I think, steps that people can take to get to the point where they can assess how the war is impacting their community and what it looks to step up locally. A lot more people could be doing that. And I think to an extent, the internet sort of outrage machine, it does keep people in a state of inaction, but constant analysis. And it's a big way to get paralyzed.
Well, this is where, and you know, it's interesting because Akwasi knows because he's in them. But you know, exactly what you just said. We've been there, done that. You know, had the T-shirt, right? Like we have Telegram groups, Signal groups, and you know all, and what they largely end up being, not just ours, but you know other ones too, are basically just information vomit centers. You know what I mean? Rather than like if somebody calls out and they're like, "Hey, I'm in trouble," i.e., I don't know, us, the people that have broken their backs helping other people, and you know, oh, like your kid's in trouble, fuck, okay, like we'll get my car, go, you know, drive an hour and a half, you know, at 9 o'clock at night, get back home at like 1 a.m, no problem, help you work it. But when other people are in trouble, crickets. Why? Fear, a lot of the time. But mind you, you know, there's a couple here and there, and you really start dealing with quality over quantity. But the point being, you can make those networks, but it really does get down to the fundamental thing that Akwasi has been talking about as well, which is like, if the thing happens, will you show up? The cool thing is that, like, you know, whether it's a grand jury, assemblies, all this kind of stuff, the cool thing is that in the States, there are plenty of examples of counties that are executing these kinds of actions successfully, because the people in the assemblies and the communities do show up and they do take a stand, and they, like, we're not talking guns here, even though they have them in the States. We're talking paperwork, but like relentless pursuit of like paperwork, law. And we're not just talking like one or two people out of those assemblies. We're talking like the assembly, which does, you know, doesn't matter, 50, 100, 200, 700, 1,000 people. The assembly hammers the shit out of the system. Like, it doesn't have to be tens of thousands of people, 50, 100, 25, right? But if each one of those individuals is relentless in their pursuit of truth, rule of law, and action, then that is what it really takes. Yes, you need the facts, you need the evidence, you need all that other stuff, but it's like the spirited individuals that will not flinch, that will not back down, that are just going, there's a problem, and then I got to deal with it right here. I have to face the enemy head on. And, you know, Simon talked about the long-term plan and everything like that, and you know, dealing with the legacy and long-term. Part of that is also showing the next generation, the children, what it is to face the enemy and what it is to stand up. Like, how can we expect them to know what it is to actually stand up to something right there in your face if we don't inspire them and teach them how to do it? And then when it comes, show them how to do it. My sensei back in the 80s, when he started the dojo, used to say that you can't sign your kid up for karate unless you, parent, at least one of the parents, does at least 3 months of karate. And there's, like, you know, since running my own place, I haven't done that. But when we go back full force, I am going to do that. Because, like, if there's anything these last 4 years have shown, it's that, like, you know, it's like the hockey mom or hockey dad, you know, griping at their kids when they don't get on the ice and do it themselves. It's worse with the karate ones, because it's like, oh, I need my kid to know how to defend themselves, and okay, cool. Can you? And the answer for, like, you know, an out of shape mom and dad is usually no, absolutely not. Like, if somebody came up with a knife on the street, like, you're dead and your kids are dead, because you sign up your kids for karate, but you won't do it yourself. It's the same kind of concept for this kind of thing, right? Like ultimately, the answer is no. You probably won't do the thing, but universe is an abundant and wonderful place. You always have a choice to do the thing, and you can change that current state of being right now. And this is where, you know, our action of the grand jury, where, you know, this is a call. Like, we need a grand jury now. We got, you know, maybe half, you know, or a little more, a little less than 25, but we need more. But the idea is that, like, there is a process for this. There is a precedence for this. This has been done before. This is not a new concept, right? And that grand jury can assemble and petition the courthouses. And if the court, like local ones, if the courthouses don't want to actually admit a grand jury into them, no problem. We can assemble elsewhere. And under the Police Services Act, police officers can act as constables of the common law. We can get an active duty police. And if they don't want to do that, then that just becomes more evidence. Like anything that they don't do, it doesn't mean that we failed. It just becomes more evidence. And then we can actually,
under their oath, they are called to do that, right?
Correct. Under the, and even in court, they're like, well, the criminal code and the Police Services Act, when we use evidence, we quote from the Police Services Act and the Criminal Code of Canada. Like we use other law too, but like,
what's their response? Just like, oh, we don't acknowledge that law, even though it's on the books.
Yes, and like much like these guys,
we don't like that law, so we're not going to enforce it.
Exactly, and much like they admitted under oath that they never read our evidence, these people don't even know their own friggin' book. So it's like it's you know their stuff better than they do, no problem. But again, the grand jury has the process, and then we go through everything. June 3rd. When our official, because that's one of the things Marcella, the woman acting as judge, kept on saying, is that we'll deal with this stuff in the actual trial. The voir dire is in the trial. We got to go for, like, she should have dismissed it there when we had all this stuff, right? But whatever. So on June 3rd, the jury, they're going to come to their own conclusion, right? Because we cannot be part of the jury. Because we're the victims, right? So the jury would come to a conclusion that, like, there's a criminal thing here, and then that becomes a presentment or an indictment. So June 3rd, where it's like, okay, our proceedings and our thing is going to be this. They're coming in with a big surprise because the grand jury is coming in there, and we're the only ones with evidence. We're the only ones with proof. We're the only ones that have fulfilled the burden of proof beyond any reasonable doubt. And we're the only ones that have the rule of law on our side. And we're certainly, universally, spiritually, and every other adverbly, we are the only ones who have truth on our side. And ultimately, that's what it's going to come down to. They do it in the States, it is successful. But we over here, we have an opportunity, because in the States, they have a Declaration of Independence, they have all these other things. They do have some things of legitimacy. Canada has really interesting things. From 1931 onwards, all laws, mandates, everything go by right of Her Majesty and then His Majesty. And then that's done through the Governor General. And then that power is transferred into the Lieutenant Governors of the provinces. The royal assent at the at Westminster, where the Crown said, okay, we're going to let our colonies govern themselves. That royal assent had to have paperwork behind it that said, and basically made the Governor General the government, right? That paperwork never happened. Meaning, like it's literally like a 24-hour thing. One day to the next day. And this, I think it was something in Bar, but this was brought up in a court in 1940 or 1941. But like I could give the link to you guys if you want. But the point being, the Governor General never had the proper authority or paperwork to actually be a governor or sign anything by right of. Meaning every law, statute, mandate, anything after 1931 has no legal or lawful force or effect. These are facts. We can prove it.
It's a
They
big statement. It's a big
cannot.
statement.
Okay,
But
so here's my question though. What would it not have been relatively simple for them to bring forward the paperwork to make the Governor General legitimate?
Yes.
So why not do that?
Well, that's there are some really good questions with that, right? And like part of it has to do with liability. Part of it has to do with like what the crown wanted to be a part of and not be a part of it. Part of, and I'm tending to believe this side as well. But this is my own theory. Maybe I everything else I'll say is a fact, right? But I'll put a bit of a tinfoil hat on for this one, okay? But I would say that, you know, let's say we'll make a hypothetical assumption that there's good guys and bad guys. You can call it a deep state, a cabal, an Orion group, or you can call it a federation, alliance, like whatever you want to call it, right? There's some good, there's some bad. I really do believe that even though there is a lot of what we would perceive as bad happening here, there have been nuggets of truth and things that we can use on our spiritual journey to get to where we need to be. And part of those nuggets are law and truths like this along the way that like we if we choose to use it, like I can teach a block, but if a punch is coming at your head and you go ah, and you don't even put your arm up, like you're like, I know you know how to do this, but if you don't do it right, it's
you got to do it.
We've got these nuggets along the way, and they are things that we can use if we choose to apply them. We are presently applying them, and many other people before us have done this too. Just because it doesn't get documented in their proceedings a lot of the time, it does happen, and it has happened before. And people have been successful with this thing. I've talked to people that have been successful with this thing. I've met people that have been successful using this kind of stuff. And you like, we're talking freedom of information requests, all these things, right? Like when you don't blink and you put it right in their face, they are unable to prove that they are legitimate in any way. But what they are fighting for right now is very similar to what we're fighting for. And it is an existential issue. They are about to crumble, rightfully so. And they are fighting as though their entire way of being and their entire crime is about to crumble. We're like, we haven't even launched a missile or thrown a punch or committed any violence, but all of us, we're about to get this thing to crumble. You've got, military arrests that are happening on the back end. Like officers are being, convicted by the judge advocate generals. We haven't seen Kate. We haven't seen Charles. Schlob's, gone right now, right? Like there are things happening along the way. The time is right. The anvil is ready to be struck. Like we just have to do the thing, and like it can be done with tomorrow. So this is where, as we form the grand jury, which if people want to email lakeshore.sovereignassembly@gmail.com, they can do that if they want to be, especially if they're local, like anywhere in the GTA. Like we can meet in the Halton region, that's no problem. We could even potentially do an online grand jury, because that's valid. That's a thing. We can record the proceedings. But the point being, to go in and face the beast head on, and heavens, like, if people want to, they don't even have to be in the grand jury. But imagine, like Akwasi said, if we had 1,000 people, 10,000 people show up at a courthouse on June 3rd, and it just to simply say, we are here to bear witness to the grand jury's decision. We are aware of the grand jury's decision. We are aware that this building here is a center of fraud. We're aware of the crime, and we are here to witness the rule of law actually taking effect, because we are victims as well. There's 1,000 of us. There's 10,000 of us. Hell, we took off a day of work to be here. God forbid people actually took it to that level right there, right? But we took off a day of work because it is our lawful duty as people that want to live here to stand up to the crime. We're not here to be violent. We have law and paper and truth on our side. Imagine if 10,000, like, to me, that's bigger than any protest. That's bigger than the entire convoy of Ottawa, because all Ottawa was a bunch of people saying, okay, like, please stop doing this to us. And we want you to come to the table to negotiate with us. Please, please, please. Nobody there actually said, hey, you guys are, like, treasonous. You're committing a massive crime. And like imagine if all those people in Ottawa performed a citizen's arrest, because the police and like them were breaking the law. Didn't have to go and physically arrest anybody, but literally just like made a unified declaration. So to go directly to the court and to say, we the people are the law. This is the common law, is people, not a system, not a corporation. People at the root of it, coming together in an agreement and standing up for what is right. And if they say to that group of people, you don't matter, you literally said that 25 people, like, you can convene a jury of 12, and then they're like, what they come to becomes the verdict. Well, here's 25. So you're saying that, like, a grand jury doesn't matter? You're saying that this 1,000 people, this 10,000 people, that they don't matter? In which case, you've just very publicly broken the social contract, the tacit agreement, the rule of law. Like, you literally have absolutely no standing whatsoever. And then imagine if every single one of those people that showed up followed up and actually slammed the paperwork in. So, like, you know, on and on and on it goes. Like, if we had, all of us, if we had that kind of mentality from the beginning, we wouldn't be here right now. But we have the opportunity to make that change right now, prior to June 3rd, and then potentially on June 3rd.
There's a lot that we need to, Simon, were you about to say something?
I was just going to say, like, is this a call to action then? If there's people who are in a position to join up, can you just state again what they need to do if they're in a position to do that, and what the requirements are for them to be valid participants? Absolutely. Yeah. So if anybody, especially locally in the GTA, Halton area, you know, somewhere between Halton and the GTA, right? If you are interested in physically being part of the grand jury, you can email lakeshore.sovereignassembly@gmail.com and just make your subject grand jury interest, right? I think that's simple enough. And if you don't live in that area, but you want to be part of a grand jury online, absolutely. Like, the same thing, lakeshore.sovereignassembly@gmail.com.
and grand jury interest, you know, we'll take them all. There would be I think a bare minimum to qualify you would be a declaration of non-consent, and, you know, some paperwork to say that, you know, you like swear to remain impartial and all those kinds of things, and like, you know, some basic paperwork that anybody for any jury would undergo, right? Like we have to be, in martial arts, you say you don't want to beat the opponent, you have to outclass the opponent, right? Like, we have more evidence, more law, more this, more that. Like, we need to show that everyone along the way is following proper procedure, right? Lawful procedure, so that we have more standing than they do. If they've done any kind of paperwork, like a live birth certificate, or you know, there's so many different ways. If they've done any kind of paperwork to separate themselves from the system, that's even better, because then we truly have a jury of our peers, right? Rather than people that haven't exited. But I don't want to disqualify anybody from that. There can be declarations of non-consent that you could do even if you haven't filed paperwork, right? So that's okay. And then the idea would be, if you want to be part of the grand jury, you actually have to commit. And like, you know, we got between now and prior to June 3rd. That's like, really, it's not a ton of time. And to go through the entire process that the grand jury would have to rule on, we're probably looking at like 2 days, maybe 3, of like, you know, potentially, I'm spitballing right now, but like, it could be like an 8-hour commitment each day, because we're treating this like a trial, right? Like, if we want to go in with any
This is in court.
Yeah. Well, like, this would be our grand jury, though, right? Like, the grand jury would have to review the evidence, and then they'd have to make a ruling, you know. But like, it's only the future of our country at play, right? So like, what's
a couple hours?
It might be worth like a couple of shifts, you know what I mean? But that's kind of the grand jury process. And then for anybody else, the call to action would be to show up at the 7755 Huron, Ontario Street in Brampton. Okay, so that address again, 7755 Huron, Ontario Street, Brampton.
Here, Ontario Street?
Huron, Ontario Street. So that's HUR Ontario. HUR Ontario.
I think there's 2 hours.
What's that?
I thought there was 2 hours. Never mind, you're right.
No, 1 hour. Yeah.
Ontario. Okay.
Unless you're talking about the law of the sea, in which case it's here, Ontario.
Oh, wow.
Important dad joke.
So 7755 Huron, Ontario Street, Brampton. That's the Glenville Davis Courthouse. June 3rd at I think that one's at 9 a.m. Okay, so 9 a.m. June 3rd. 7755 Huron, Ontario Street, Brampton. That's the one where, like, even if you're not on the grand jury, show up. Show up.
Is the process being recorded? Are you able to video record within the court? Oh, is this being acknowledged even by the court? So okay, hold on. So June 3rd, you are. Who's bringing who to court here?
So June 3rd is technically our trial date. Okay, so it's booked, right? What they believe that we're showing up for is for Marcella to hear our evidence over, you know, like a 5-day period, and then she gets to make a ruling. What we're gonna do is bring a grand jury, and then
what are the chances she just walks out?
Then we broke the walls of Jericho.
All right.
Yes, Kwasi, that's a great analogy there. Yeah, but the point being, right? Like, it's about, and let's keep this in mind as well, right? They are, and we said in our last court case, like, Marcella, you and Leonard Brichetti and these officers are participating with treason, right? It's not like there's going to be less disclosure and evidence and facts leading into June 3rd. Like, we're probably going to go on with a nuclear bomb of truth in June 3rd. And like, this is the thing. At the high level, it's going here. And, you know, we're talking to some folks at higher levels as well, right? So we're not just dealing at our local level. Like we're dealing with the higher levels as well. And they're aware of what we're doing. So the point being, like, they're doing their thing here, we're doing it here. Like, if you know, they're kind of working their way down. But if we're working our way up as they're working our way down, like, we're gonna just and just take off from there. So the more of us that do these kinds of things, the more of us that show up to this, the more authority the good guys have to step in and act. In the Law of War Manual, section 11.10.1, it very clearly says if the courts are unable and unwilling to perform their duties and corruption can be proved, the good military has the authority to suspend ordinary courts. Part of that Law of War Manual is that we have to exhaust all peaceful alternatives.
We spoke about this last time. The Law of War Manual comes from where?
Department of Justice. Or sorry, Department of Defense. Department of Defense. It's
Canada.
literally something anybody can look up.
In Canada.
America.
In America.
Yes.
Okay. Now would be a good time actually to go back over Canada not actually being a nation. And Canada, so you'd mentioned that the Articles of Confederation mentioned something about Canada being an extension of the states. Is that right?
Yeah, it's the original Articles of Confederation. I think it's Article 11. But there's a whole bunch of other paperwork on the corporate side that shows that, like, Canada is an arm of Texas, and even then, just going back to the fact that, like, Canada not being legit, like, you can take it back to the Washington Declaration of 1871. And the fact that, like, the Crown basically treated Canada as an asset to be reparations to America for, you know, like, as part of their whole settlement. Like, it's you get into some treaties and you get into a whole lot of things, but then you can even take it back to the fact of you know, like, the Governor General not having any legitimate authority, you know, and then you can go even farther back and you go back to the Statutes Law Revision Act of 1891 or 93, and how, like, Queen Victoria said, like, upon my death, all my heirs and executors and successors and all powers of the monarchy are just gone after my death. So, like, there's just a series of illegitimacy to the entire thing, and ultimately, you know, like, we're hearing all the time that, like, Canada doesn't have, we really don't have, like, a standing military right now. The ones that are standing for the Crown, right? But that's a whole other story. But even with that, when you're dealing with the Department of Defense and the United States military, and, you know, white hats and black hats and everything like that, you're ultimately, in a wartime situation, military law supersedes civil law, and that's the, doesn't matter, Supreme Court over here, Supreme Court over there, they've all ruled that. That's something that's well understood. And you can kind of get into like the executive orders from Trump's administration, like 13818 and 13858 and a few others that you can just read. Like, all the assets have been seized, all the deed state's been kind of taken care of, like that, you know, that stuff's already there. And then those same executive orders, even in the Biden administration, were actually renewed. So, like, it wouldn't make logical sense for him to actually renew those orders unless he wasn't actually in charge.